Jodi Cross has more than 22 years of experience as a marketing strategist and brand developer. She ran global marketing for over a decade for a $300 million portfolio of 30 hotels in the U.S., Latin America, the Middle East, and the Caribbean. Cross established a CEO Women's Mentoring Organization in South Florida and held the position of executive director for over 10 years. And of course, that's where I know Jodi from because I'm a part of that. She's also conducted strategic planning sessions and public speaking engagements on marketing strategy, brand development, revenue generation, social media, and public relation topics for franchises and business owners in over 15 states. Some of her clients are the Biltmore Hotel, Executive Women's Golf Association, One Parking, the Commonwealth Institute, the Global Advisory Council, and Jonathan's Landing Golf Club. She's the author of a monthly column called Crosstalk and a travel blog called CT Takes Off. She enjoys golf, travel, kayaking, and horseback riding. Welcome, Jodi.
Thank you so much, Gail. I'm so delighted to be with you.
Well, I never knew you had all those hobbies. I adore the horseback riding and thinking about kayaking, and of course I'm traveling all the time, but I am not a golfer, so I have to leave you alone there. But I think what you've accomplished is just amazing. Of course, I know you from the Commonwealth Institute. I'm a facilitator for their not-for-profit forum, and you really did a magnificent job because you were there for 10 years and you developed it from nothing to something. So you really have this ability as a brand and marketing person to really bring something out of the ashes and into reality. So let's find out, though, a little bit about you, where you grew up, and you spent a lot of your time in the hospitality industry. So how did you get started there?
Well, I'm originally from Rochester, New York. In case you don't know, that's way upstate, very close to the Canadian border.
I grew up because I was born in Albany, New York, believe it or not.
Oh, my gosh. See, it's such a small world. And so I grew up on 100 acres in a 150-year-old cobblestone house that my parents had renovated. And my upbringing really exposed me a lot to nature. That's where my passion for horseback riding evolved, and wide open spaces. And it really emblazoned my sense of imagination. I think it was a period of time that, there wasn't a lot of video games and things like that. So it was really all about, learn to play outside and use your imagination to create things. So I'd say my passion for the hospitality industry started when I was about 10 years old. We took a family trip to Hawaii. And as soon as we landed on the Big Island, I was draped with one of those beautiful leis of flowers. From that moment on, I was hooked on travel. I realized at that point that there was a whole world out there, and I just really wanted to see it all. And so to this day, I say, jokingly, but in reality, if I could make a living traveling and writing about it, I would. So I live vicariously through my travel blog, CT Takes Off, which was a spinoff from my monthly column.
Well, that's fantastic. When you talk about someone putting the lei on you in Hawaii, when I was speaking in Hawaii, I met my husband over there. I was doing a lot of programs, so he flew in and met me there, and he put a lei on me, and he said, I've always wanted to lay you in the airport, and now I have. So that was the kind of sense of humor my husband had, and that's why I guess we got along so many years. But how did you get into marketing specifically? Because that's a very niched area. Yeah,
so I studied in college hospitality management and a double major in a master's in business administration. But I was always a very creative person. And so I started my first job in Miami out of college and at a hotel. And my parents were, trying to get me back to Rochester, but there were really literally like 2 or 3 hotels there. So I decided I would make a run for it in South Florida. My odds would be much better. I landed at PGA National after a couple of years working in Miami at the golf resort there. And at some point I was in sales. My trajectory was coming up sales, the line of sales. And the general manager that we had at the time asked if I would be interested in transitioning into marketing, and there was an opening. I liked sales, but I didn't really love the ups and downs of it and the, tenuous, 1 month good, next month you don't know. So I think he knew me pretty well, but he also cautioned me on the position and said, if you do this, you might be potentially cutting off a career path down the road. And he was right about that as the business evolved, that marketing directors became more niche than mainstream. And that was a lesson that I learned for sure, but I don't really regret it, and I really enjoy marketing and helping people grow their business through marketing.
Well, it's interesting because, yeah, salespeople in whatever business or profession it is, I mean, they're always needed, and there will always be a market for them. But I think marketing is a little more sophisticated, and I think it's a tremendous ability and a background to have. So, who would you say were your early mentors in your career?
So, of course, my dad, he was a very driven person. He ran a family business that was in our family for a multiple generations, from my great-grandfather to my grandfather to my dad. Even today at 85 years old, nothing keeps him down. He's just such a driven person. But really interestingly, my very first boss out of college was an ex-nun who had left her order and went into the hotel business. I know that's very unusual, and it was indeed.
I was going to say that is very unusual.
And she was one tough cookie, let me tell you. She ran a tight ship, and she really, she scared us, into line for sure. In fact, there were many nights that she would work through the whole day and night, and we would find her the next day in her office in the same clothes that she was the day before. She taught me a lot about my craft, and she was really relentless in her pursuit of excellence. And that's kind of one of my early mentors. And I think I learned a little bit how not to be from her as much as I learned how to be from her.
But that was probably her religious training, because as a nun, it's very disciplined and very ordered and very organized. And I mean, that really served her well.
Yeah, I remember telling my parents at the time, I don't know if I'm cut out for this career because I need to rest, and this woman works all night long and never sleeps.
But she probably also didn't have, a personal life and lots of kids and things like that distracted her, because that's the problem that many women find on the road up, is that, they, even though there is a spouse there or a partner there, they are the ones that are having the heavy do the heavy lifting. They have to take care of the kids. They have to take care of the home. And it really is so important to find a man who can share that, so you have the ability to reach the top level where you want to go, So
I think balance is definitely a key.
Yeah. So tell us about your accomplishments along the way, because you've got a long list of them.
So as I mentioned, I was very creative, and I always had this ability to kind of listen to a story a little bit of what people would tell me, and then kind of translate that into something that I thought would make money for a business or one of my clients. So one of the things that kind of came about when I was at PGA National was they were working on a redesign of the golf course with Jack Nicklaus. And there was a lot of buzz about the 3 final holes and how challenging they were, and from a design perspective. As it happened, my dad had just gone on a trip to Alaska and ended up on a bear hunt with Jack Nicklaus. Of course, he had no idea who he was because he didn't play golf, and he really didn't care. But when he returned, he said to me, some guy on the trip, Jack something, was looking for a golden bear. I don't know why. And I told him my daughter worked at the golf resort in Palm Beach, and he said he was redesigning the course there. I kind of thought he was full of it, and I was like, oh my gosh, Dad, you're on a trip with Jack Nicklaus and you don't even know who he was. And that really got me thinking that we should really take those 3 holes and kind of package them and name them. And so I came up with the name The Bear Trap. And I guess it's nearly 15 or so years later, they're still using that name, and that has received national and international media recognition as some of the toughest holes in golf.
Fantastic! That is great. You see, you never know where what do they say? You're 6 degrees away from somebody, and you never even knew that.
Exactly.
So have you found any special challenges or obstacles that you've had to face doing this? Because in the hospitality industry, I mean, it's pretty open now to women. I think back, many years ago, it wasn't as open, right? But right now, it is open. And then you've got this other business now, Crosstalk, that you are involved with and that you own. So tell us some of the challenges that you've had.
So, yeah, I mean, definitely women, and I would consider it not just hospitality, in the golf business in the late 80s and 90s. I was one of, very few. So that was challenging. There was obviously the wage gap issue, which is a big buzz today and people are still talking about. But I know for a fact that, I was doing a job and there was a man side by side next to me doing a very similar job who was making 2 to 3 times more than I was making. And so that was very frustrating.
Did you confront that? Did you confront that, Jodi? I mean, was that something?
Yeah, as I moved up the ranks, and I got myself into a position where I was, more on the executive committee, steering committee. And then during that period, I also went back to college and got my master's. And so with all of those things going, I thought, I'll invest in myself, get my master's. And I remember at that point, one of my bosses just looking at me saying, well, you're not going to get any more money for it. And I was like, oh, okay. So they really didn't value that at the time. And I really dug in, and my MO was just to work harder. And that's really kind of what I tried to do. But one of the other challenging times was reinventing myself after 9/11. That was a period of time when the hotel business, and especially from the side where I was in, resorts, it was just miserable. I mean, nobody wanted to go to a resort. Nobody wanted to plan a meeting there and have resort at the, end of their meeting. So we just had mass layoffs and cancellations. And in fact, I was at Doral in Miami at that time. And it was just miserable. I call that period when type A meets a plan B. And I took some time off and just kind of traveled a little bit and went back up and recalibrated in upstate New York at my family home for a little while and just kind of regrouped and figured out what I wanted to do from there at that point. And it was an interesting time period for me, that's for sure. And one of the other really interesting stories I had was when I was working again in the golf business, and I remember we had struck a contract deal with NBC Sports to film one of the tournaments, and the gentleman was pretty hardcore there, and they had a major storm come in, and I had probably 6 figures on the line with that trade, where they had already consumed the rooms and were already staying there filming the golf course for NBC, but our part was that we would trade, some of the room deal for them and food and beverage. And I remember the storm coming, and they, pulled the coverage because it was bad out. So I thought, geez, I wonder what's going to happen here, And so I called him and I said, can you just let me know? I understand we have a weather delay if this does not come back on, because there's a time period where they will no longer, if it rolls over to the next day, they may not be able to film anything. Therefore, we wouldn't get our exposure. And he just, went crazy that I had even called him in the middle of this storm and his men were in jeopardy. Well, so I felt quite bad about that. And I sent like an amenity to his room, and I was like, whoa, and so he completely turned that around to his advantage and just really took advantage of that situation to the point where I was like, well, maybe I shouldn't have called. So I finally talked to my boss about that and said, this is what happened. And I was just concerned about this, basically our asset of this advertising that we may not get. And he told me and just assured me that I was doing, the right thing and looking out for the interests of the hotel. And that lesson to me was that, there's just some people you cannot show weakness to. And there's, takers and givers in the world, and you really got to look out for that, because some people will just take advantage of you. And so I really try to steer clear of that personality type now in my life and my career.
Well, that's true. I mean, and of course there are other people who, they show their authority because really, basically, they are very insecure. So by yelling and screaming, they seem to, they think they've got the upper hand because people don't want to deal with them. But in reality, they're very insecure about who they are and what they do. In fact, I was just talking to someone today about the factor that I think the Greenbrier right now is underwater, and they've got that big golf tournament. But it's been so rainy that the course is gone. The golf course at Greenbrier is gone. So it's kind of the same thing, But what would you say that you would tell other